Welcome back to the TrailBLAZER pod. Today we'll be talking to Frida Leibowitz. An article that Frida wrote starts, "Once upon a time, when I was a broke young college grad, I decided to get a motorcycle. Partly because I've always been an adrenaline junkie, and partly because I can only afford two wheels back then." Frida and I grew up in the same community, went to the same middle school for a few years, and then lost touch for almost a decade. While we do know each other, I'm excited to get into this conversation and learn even more. Frida is someone that inspires me, and I know she will inspire everyone listening. So let's get into it. Frida, welcome to the TrailBLAZER pod. It's great to have you here today. I want to start from the very beginning, which is when we met, 4th or 5th grade? I can't remember, 9 or 10 years old?
Must have been, 5th grade probably, because that's when I moved to the States.
Yeah. So you were like the new kid in school. You had like the blonde hair, blue eyes. I thought you were the coolest kid in town. So I want to hear a little bit about that from you. What was that experience coming to a new country and a new school?
Wow, this is definitely not something I've spoken about in a podcast before. Wow, it was a really interesting experience. I think, I talk about this a lot about my personal journey at this point. It's funny because for so many years, like, my personal story was so well hidden. A lot of my friends, like, later on, who met me later on in college or during my career, had no idea. But, moved to the States. I moved with a single mom who came here with a dream of a better life for her kids. Moved from Israel, from a very religious community, to another very religious community at first, until we made our way. And so I think it was a big change. In the beginning, of course, especially when you're a kid, you see America on TV and you think it's going to be, like, incredible and it just looks awesome. And there's all this, like, I think the thing that got to me most was, like, the big Toys R Us. There used to be, like, that giant Toys R Us store in Manhattan, and that was crazy. Like, for a kid coming outside of the U.S., it was, like, the craziest idea of having this giant toy store with a Ferris wheel in the middle.
I love that.
So I was really excited at first. Like, I remember, like, I said to all my friends, I'm leaving, I'm going to America. My family was going to America, and, like, I was all for it. And then I think probably, like, 3 months after moving and after starting school, I was like, never mind. I'm ready to go back now. I remember, like, I went to my mom. I'm like, okay, I'm done now. America is not for me. Like, I got to go back. And,
just not working.
Fortunately and unfortunately, like, I was like, no, my mom was like, we're going to stay here. We're going to make it work. Oh, it's your cat. I know you had a cat.
Oh, yeah, this is Tiger, by the way. He decided to join us today.
Love it. So anyway, I think there was definitely that. And also middle school it's already a tough age. It's already a tough time. You're figuring yourself out. You realize you're, like, establishing a sense of self and a personality and self-awareness. And so it was definitely some challenging times then. But, like, what they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So I think after that move, I think there's, like, no other move has ever, like, scared me again. I was like, oh, I can do anything. You could drop me in the middle of it. Yeah, I'm like, you could put me anywhere and I'll figure it out. So
it definitely didn't make you stronger. I love that you mentioned the Toys R Us because I have such vivid memories of, like, the big drafts.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine for you. For me, it was exciting. So coming from another country. So we lost touch for a bunch of years and reconnected. But I kind of missed a big chapter in your life. And I know you're a first-generation college student like me. But what was that experience like? So for me, it was like learning a new language. I didn't know how to sign up for classes. I didn't know who to talk to. What was it like for you?
Taking a few steps back, like, I didn't even know what college was. I didn't even know I should even want to go to college. I was like, what is this, right? And I think that, like, it's so interesting how, like, when it's so not a part of your life and nobody around you goes to college and you are the oldest in your family, you're also the oldest in your family, just like I am. And you have to even, like, think about what you want to do, and when you come out of, like, one world where there was a very specific path for you to go on, and now you're not in that world anymore and that path is not viable, like, how do you figure it out? And I actually think that's also why a lot of people get lost, because it's so hard. Like, you have no path, you have to create it for yourself, and you don't even know what you should want, right?
Exactly.
And so the way it happened for me was, I remember, like, at some point when we moved within Brooklyn to another area, and there was this woman who was religious and she was a lawyer. And I met her and I thought she was the coolest thing. She was, like, my friend's neighbor. And the reason why she was, because she didn't grow up religious, she became religious later. So she was, like, a lawyer. And her work sounded cool, and she went into the city every day, and she would talk about it, and I decided at that point that I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm like, whatever this woman is doing, that sounds cool to me. That's what I want to do. And then I decided I wanted, that's like at the age of 12, I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer. No idea what that entailed. Nobody else around me was a lawyer. No one in my family was a lawyer. Like,
It sounds like you, though.
Yeah, I was like, this, no, like, I thought a lot of people said to me, like, okay, this could be your, it makes sense with your personality. Of course, not something that was common at the time, so I had no idea what the path to get there was. And then I remember in 10th grade, I met this other girl who also had her sights, and she told me there's this thing you need to take. It's called the SATs. And if you want to go to college, you need to take that test. And if you want to be a lawyer, you need to go to college. And I was like, okay, I guess I need to do this thing. So then I very, innocently went to my high school principal at the time, religious school, and I'm like, I need to take the SATs. And she just, laughed me out of the room, basically. She was like, haha, no, you don't need that, honey. I'm like, okay, I need that. So I found, another school in the area who was offering this test. My mom helped me. To my mom's credit, any ideas that I had, she was like, yeah, I'm going to help you do it. She had no idea either. Amazing. She had no idea what college was or anything, but she was like, she would just get on board. She was like, yeah, we want to go to college. Okay, great, we're going to college. Okay, let's go get you an SAT. Let's go sign you up.
Cheerleader.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's how I started there. Eventually, I ended up for 11th grade, I switched schools again to a school that actually did promote higher education, which was great. So it was the first time in my life where actually higher education became part of the path. There was a lot of catching up to do. I think also at the time it was hard because I was very underestimated there. I came in, there was a huge gap in my education. And you're coming in 11th grade when all these kids have already AP courses and they're ready to go. They picked their school. They went to 11th grade. My friends were going to see schools, and I was still figuring out what college even means and what I need to do in life. And so at that point, I remember I sat down with a college guidance counselor 3 months in. She looked at me. She's like, we could look at some local college options for you, maybe and she would mention the lowest tier schools, the things that were the easiest to get into. And I'm a very competitive person, and I'm always like, you just give me a ceiling and I'm gonna go break it. And so I remember when she said that to me, and my friends, other kids in my class were applying to really good schools, and she was like, I don't think that's for you. And I'm like, that's for me. I'm gonna get that done.
It's made for me.
And yeah, I'm like, no, what? I can do this. And so yeah, and that's how I ended up applying. Applied to a couple schools. Eventually got a really good scholarship to NYU. I was very lucky. It's the best part of the American dream that I did get a scholarship to an amazing school. Wow. And the rest is history. Even though, we could talk about how difficult it was once I got in.
I had actually a really similar experience in terms of not knowing what college was. And then when I went to my principal and my guidance counselor, they're like, well, your grades are okay now, but the gap is insane because I've missed so many of the classes I needed. They're like, you got to find a way to stand out. And so at that point I was really interested in journalism, and so I put together a portfolio of my art pieces and poetry. Nobody does that. You just send in your grades, but I was like, I got to find a way to show them who I am besides for the education part. So yeah, we can talk about this for a long time.
Of course, I'm sure you also, I wrote the sob story of my life in my essays.
Yeah, exactly. Make it very personal and why you. Yeah. So what would your advice be for a young girl now who's soon graduating and wishes to pursue a college degree but has no support experience, maybe no financial means to go to college? Now with the experience you have, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say, and this is something that I wish I had done, is to find that mentor, to find someone who will help you with this, because I think I went through it mostly alone and figuring things out on my own, and I would distinctly remember having a breakdown at some point and just bawling my eyes out because I was struggling. I couldn't figure out the financial piece, and I had no one in my family that I could turn to, and no one has done this. And I think the one thing that I did have was at least at the end I was at least in a community, in a school where most of my friends were going to college, and so I had at least that. But I think finding that maybe one or two people who could really be your mentors, who know you. And by the way, if you have no one in your immediate circles, that's fine. Go on LinkedIn, just reach out to people. I promise you, if you find someone, you're like, hey, this is my background, this is who I am, I really want to go into your field, love to just hear your advice. And you could talk to a few people like that and find someone you click with, and they could become your mentor. That's eventually in life how I found mentors, is really just reach out to people who I thought were interesting and doing interesting things in life and asking them for help. And a lot of them, I really, most people are awesome, and they will help you, and they're want to be there for you. So I think definitely finding that mentor, very, very important. The other thing, which is something that I actually told my siblings more, is don't feel, I think for me, I was so stressed the whole time. I felt like I needed to be at the top immediately, get everything done. it helped me get places, but just with a lot of stress. And now I remember when I was like going through this process with all my younger siblings. In the beginning, I was also like very like my second sister. I was like, no, you gotta go to top school. You gotta do this. You gotta do this. And honestly, like I also saw eventually the cost of that, and like that's not always maybe the way to go. So sometimes you can slow down. For example, if you think you want to take a gap year after high school and go figure other things out and go have an experience and go do whatever, go volunteer somewhere, go to learn somewhere, whatever you want to do, and take a second to understand your life, yourself. It's okay. Life is long. Your career is long. Like when you're here, you're like, nothing would have happened if I would have taken a year. Nothing would have happened if I would have like maybe started off, taking a couple classes and then figured out what I want to do, right? There's later times in life when it does get harder. Like after you graduate college, you're more expected to have your things together and like get it done. But until then, like while you're, a student and until you're a student, you have so much time. You can figure things out. And I think that is something that like, it's okay. Yeah. It's okay to slow down. It's okay not to know everything. It's okay to be a little behind. Like, in the beginning, you are going to be just fine. And even if you get there a year later or 2 years later, it really, in the long term, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I love that advice. I felt the same way. I felt like I had to get to where I wanted at a certain age. And now that I'm older, I actually feel way younger, if that makes sense. Yeah. Like, I feel like I'm aging backwards a little bit. But I think also important for people to know that, like, travel and living life and doing these experiences teach you just as much as college does, right? Or even in different ways. And even more sometimes. So I love that advice. Let's pivot a little bit to Debbie. You're the CEO and founder of Debbie. What's Debbie?
So Debbie is the first rewards program for financial wellness. Think of it a little bit like if you're familiar with credit card points, just reversed. So we basically built a point system where instead of just getting points for spending, you're actually getting points for any good financial behavior. Right, so every time you're making your payments on time, you're adding money to your savings account, you're reducing spend in certain categories, all of that is worth points. And we partner with awesome financial institutions, banks, credit unions, and fintechs to be able to offer these points to consumers for just building good habits. And we're really on a mission to help people achieve financial security, one habit at a time.
Well put. So where did this idea come from? I do this
only all day, every day, 500 times.
This is your elevator pitch. Yeah. So let's get into a little bit more of the personal side. Why was this something that you decided to create?
Yeah, so like all good founding stories go, I have a chip on my shoulder. I feel like this is a very millennial thing. Like when you have a childhood trauma, then you're like, I'm going to go spend the rest of my life fixing it and I'm going to fix it for everyone. So I'm also probably like an older child symptom, like, I got to go fix everyone's problems. Yeah. So I, as I mentioned before, grew up in a family that really wasn't exactly set up for success financially. So single mom, not college educated, didn't understand, we moved to the States. We showed up in Brooklyn, New York, tried to figure out how to like get things done and find, live this amazing life that we saw in the movies, a promised land or whatever. And when we talk about a lot of times in financial services and fintech, you'll hear so many people talk about access to credit. It's so important for immigrants, for low income, blah, 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 blah. But what nobody really talks about is, okay, once you get access to credit, there's so much credit in this country. Like, there is more credit here than anywhere else I have seen. Yeah. Everywhere you turn, you walk into Walmart, Macy's, Target, they're going to offer you store cards. They're going to offer you 20% off that day to buy the things you want, and you don't have to even pay for them right now. They keep inventing more ways. There's buy now, pay later now, Klarna, Afterpay, Affirm. There's like early paycheck access, right, where all these companies are helping you get, like, there's just more and more ways to access money. Now, some of that is very important. I am not completely discounting it, but the vast, vast majority is really an entire industry built on getting you to spend more and do more and all that, right? And my family definitely fell into that trap. Bought everything on credit, always leased cars, rented, never like thought about ownership, about saving, about building a long-term financial plan. And we were not the only ones, right? Like, that's the other thing is, like, I remember like when I grew up and like looked around me and I was like, whoa, I'm not the only one, especially once I joined the industry later on. Yeah. Like, we're talking about 96 million Americans who are not making their payments in full at the end of every single month. Wow. That's how many. And millennials, I believe somewhere between 50 to 60% of millennials are carrying a balance on their credit card. This is not like I thought it was just like a my family problem.
Not a small problem. I grew up
and I'm like, not a small problem. A lot of us are struggling with it, right? And I think I also had my own, like personal, I grew up, I ended up, even though I went to like one of the top undergrad business schools in the country, I still fell into the same trap, racked up 15 grand in credit card debt. And this is another thing that another point I'd like to make It's not about financial literacy. Everyone keeps telling us, oh, financial literacy people, they need to be literate, they need to understand. No, you could know how many calories are in a cookie all day long. You're still gonna eat the cookie. It's not. You could teach people all day long about compound interest, and also I think we've been underestimated. People who are lower middle income are underestimated. We're not stupid. We understand we shouldn't be spending more than we earn. We understand we shouldn't be overbuying. We should be saving, right? But understanding that doesn't mean that your behaviors are going to follow that understanding. That's just not how our brain works. Our brain actually works a lot around incentives, right? And when we looked at it, if you look at every, just behavioral economics 101 is all people just follow incentives. The clearer the incentive is, the easier it is for me to see, the sooner I will get that incentive, the more likely I am to follow that signal. So if I know that I'm going to spend money right now and have the nice thing and the Macy's is going to give me points on this card, that's what I'm going to react to. But if I can see, now with Debbie, we're trying to basically change that narrative and say, hey, if I pay down my debt and I put money in my savings account, I also get that instant gratification of getting a bunch of points, and those points are worth money that I can then use for other things, right? And to create or experiences now that we're adding. So that's really a very long-winded story of telling you how why I was passionate about this and tried to think about this problem differently.
Perfect. You actually answered my following question, which was about the behavioral part, because I remember you mentioned you kind of connected it back to the weight loss industry when we first talked, and you told me about Debbie. I did read in an article though that one of Debbie's mottos is you believe in carrots, not sticks. What do you mean by that?
Well, goes again back to the behavioral psychology piece. When you look at behavioral psychology and you look at the different models of training behavior between positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, what you're going to learn is this. On the negative reinforcement side, not negative reinforcement, I should say, just like punishments, more like. When you get a punishment, the way your brain works is it's going to be scary the first time. So it's a good deterrent, right? People will be scared of transgressing the first time around because they're scared of the punishment. But once and I'm going to translate into financial services, people are scared of missing a payment because they're going to get a late fee and they're going to get interest and fees and all this other bad stuff's going to happen. But when you look at what happens once someone has gone through, let's say something happened, an expense came up, forgot to make their payment, they had an emergency, I don't know what happened, they missed their payment once, they got a late fee. The likelihood of you going late again is 30%. After 2 times, the likelihood of you going late a third time is 80%. Punishments is something that is our brain just gets used to, and that becomes our new normal. And you will see so many consumers who just get used to being punished all the time. They just keep collecting fees. They keep being in this crappy cycle and just get used to being in this bad place, and that becomes your new normal, unfortunately. And there are so many other behavioral examples of that in abuse and all those other areas, which I don't want to get into, not on topic, but if you
whole
look
other
at
podcast,
whole other podcast, but there's so many of that. We just our brain gets used to a new pain threshold, basically, and that's what happens in with this behavioral pattern. On the other hand, when you look at models around positive reinforcement, we never ever get tired of getting another thing. That is always going to, that signal, as long as it's something valuable to me, I'm going to keep wanting to get it. I'm going to keep working at it, right? And that is something that ends up actually being a much more effective strategy for long-term change. So when you're thinking about how am I going to get people in the long run to not miss payments, you're more likely to get there by incentivizing on-time payments than by disincentivizing, missed payments.
Right.
So
really interesting. I like how it's not just about finance. It's literally about, this is life, the psychology of life. This is how we work. So fascinating. So I want to talk about being a woman in the industry. You mentioned somewhere, I don't remember where because I've read a lot of your stuff, that you saw a stark difference between men and women in senior positions, especially at big banks versus credit unions. So what was that difference that you saw?
Yeah, I think, when I worked in the industry, definitely the senior leadership is mostly male, especially more technical roles, anything that is more quantitative, technical, etc. Definitely, and of course, top leadership is C-suite tends to be very male dominated in financial services still. It's interesting that you mentioned, because I did notice that in the credit union space, there's actually much better women representation. I've seen many more women CEOs of credit unions and women executives at credit unions and women head of lending at credit unions, which is very hard to find at banks. So there's that's changing slowly. There's more and more of us out here. I think also to touch on the startup world, which is where I'm playing. Yeah. This has been an interesting one because I do meet great women founders. Not a lot of us out here, but there are some of us. We're doing things. Yeah. the biggest issue right now is in the funding gap. And the thing is, like, you know, I'm the kind of person that for a long time, I was like, I never wanted to, like, use being a woman as an excuse. I hated that. I was like, I always used to even, like, a little bit, like, judge other women who would complain about it. Because I was like, no, like, we're out here. We can get work done. We can do stuff. Like, it's fine. But at the end of the day, you're in this process and you are literally looking at other companies. And I'm not saying the male founders don't struggle. They also, I have plenty of friends who are guys who have startups who all struggle to, like, raise money. But when you look at it at scale and the amount of us, and I look at, like, the types of, like, male founded companies that are getting funded versus, like, female founded and what we have, like, it's just wild to me. And I've literally been in processes where, like, I was in a process with an investor that another male company was at, and they told me, like, I don't have enough traction. It's like, oh, you need to prove more, you need to prove more. But then when but then if 2 months later I see them make an announcement that they bet on this other company founded by males that had much less than I had. And maybe they had a better idea. Maybe they have a smarter team. It's so hard. That's the other thing. You run yourself into, like, this, like, crazy, you're like, maybe it's not, is it because I'm a woman, or, like, maybe it's other things. Like, could be that I'm just really not the right fit. Could be that it's something else, right? It's very hard to know what's really, because it's a judgment at the end of the day. But I think the one thing that I have, the one pattern that was very interesting, like, I went to, like, a woman founder event where they kind of, like, a little coaching session. And one of the things that they mentioned, and this was on, like, a Harvard Business School professor did this study where she followed a bunch of founders on their journey and monitored the fundraising process. She quantified a lot of this process. And something that she has really, really clear data on is that when she looked at the kinds of questions that male founders would get versus female founders would get, she saw a pattern where the vast majority of the questions that male founders would get were promotion questions. So things like, how big is your market? How are you going to go out there and, like, grab more market share? What is your biggest revenue opportunities? What's your big vision? Women, on the other hand, primarily get risk mitigation type of questions, prevention questions. So as opposed to asking you, like, how big is your market and how are you gonna, like, beat the competition, it's like, oh, how are you gonna, like, defend your company against others, and how does yours compare to what's already on the market, and how are you gonna fight, like, increasing costs, right? A lot of just risk mitigation questions. And that's something that I started paying more attention to in my process, and it's very true. I keep getting asked questions that are very, like, risk mitigation questions. And there's a science in turning each one of these, like, recognizing it, turning it into a promotion question. So I've tried to, like, do some of that. But I think that when you look at the numbers at the end of the day, less than 2% of VC money goes to women founders. And it's not because there's not enough out here, because I looked, 20% of founders are women, and we are getting 2% of the funding. So large gap to close over there.
So this can, like, scare off some women, right? I think a lot of women are a little bit hesitant to go into, you know, businesses, entrepreneurs, startups. You've experienced this firsthand. So how would you encourage women to go and, like, take the risk?
It's a good question. I think this also goes back to, like, when people ask me, like, should I go out there and start a company? How should I think about it? Especially if you know, to some extent, the odds are stacked against you, even though I don't like to think like that in my everyday life. In my everyday life, I'm like, I am in control of my destiny, and I have been. At the end of the day, like, you do. You make it work. Like, you can't sit there and be like, oh, everything is against me and I'm never going to succeed, because you probably won't. But I think what I just generally give advice is think about why you want to become a founder. And that why, in my eyes, is very, very important. Because I've seen, I would say, like, two different patterns. I either see founders who are out there, you know, they're just, like, their dream, their whole lives was to be a founder, to be important, to do something. And that's not, by the way, it doesn't have to be in the kind of, like, way of, like, too obsessed with themselves, or it's okay. It's okay to want to make an impact. It's okay to want, like, a big role. It's okay to want money. So that's one. The other one, and really, like, I think I'm in this camp, is, like, you're just obsessed with a certain problem and you really want to solve that problem. Both of these approaches have positives and negatives, right? When you're too obsessed with the problem, that you don't see other things. But at the end of the day, I would say, in my mind, the only way I stay sane is because I'm obsessed with what I'm solving, and I really feel like I'm solving something important. And at the end of the day, that means I'm just never going to stop. Like, as long as this problem is still there, and I think I'm the one to fix it, and I know something that nobody else does, and I feel like I do about this problem, I'm gonna be here waking up every morning and working on this as hard as it is, and when all the odds are stacked against me, because I really am so confident in what I'm doing. And I think that is, when you're working on something important, the other thing is you're really enjoying the journey, right? At the end of the day, like when a user sends us a love letter, which happens to us like 3 times a week, and someone tells us how like this has changed their lives and it made something so much better for them, and they feel great, and they just cashed out their first rewards dollars, and it helped them, that's
amazing.
That makes me want to keep going, right? That makes it like the journey itself actually means something to me, so that I would choose this even if there was no outcome, right? Yeah. Which there definitely will be an outcome, because I'm also competitive, and I'm also going to make sure that we make a lot of money. But, I think that is something that is, I would say, especially when you're going into a difficult space, if you're really obsessed with what you're doing, you're not just going to like make it, but you're going to enjoy it too. And I think that's very important.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think like having a mission and the why is crucial. I think it's what gets you up in the morning. And I don't know if you read the book, Uri Levin, he's the co-founder of Waze. He wrote a book. It's like, can't remember the exact title, but it's all about the problem, not the solution. Like focus on what's the problem, what are people struggling with. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it.
I should read that, yeah.
It's exactly what you're talking about. So you quit your job to start Debbie, right?
I did.
Okay, let's talk about that. That's scary. That's taking a risk. I know you ride motorcycles, so you're kind of a risk taker. But talk to me about that.
So first of all, I'm an adrenaline junkie. Like no one in my life was especially surprised about this decision. The one thing is I like to call myself, like the way I describe myself on the motorcycle is like I'm a grandma rider. So I love adrenaline, but like I will always take like precautions around risk. Like I'm not.
You're a safe adrenaline junkie.
Exactly. I'm a safe. Exactly. I'm an adrenaline junkie with floaties. Yeah. That's like the way I would think about it. So I think that the thing that I did before I jumped, and also something especially you have to think about, if you don't have parents who are going to support you, or maybe can't, right, and you don't have that network, and in my case I didn't have a partner. I wasn't like with someone who can now pay my rent if I don't have a job and I don't have money. And so I think when you're there, you could take steps. Like I thankfully I was very lucky. I had a great Wall Street job for 3 years prior where I was making a great salary and I was putting money away and I had savings. And I remember I also sat with myself and I made myself a 6-month plan. I made myself a budget. I was very lucky because I had my co-founder, Rachel, who's incredible. We actually lived together at the time, so she was able to help support the company financially. She kept working and while I quit, so that was also another arrangement that you could think about. Maybe you find a co-founder who can stay at their job, can help sponsor some of the expenses, and then you could go out on your own. That was very, very helpful. But I also set for myself a 6-month budget, amount of money that was comfortable using. And then I said to myself, okay, after 3 months, if I'm not getting any traction on this, I'm going to start looking for a job. And after 6 months, if I cannot get funding for this, I'm gonna go back to work, basically. Yeah. And guess what? Month 6 is when we got funding, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think it's one of those
crazy.
Like, I think this is one of those where like I think because I knew that I had to get it done by 6 months, I'm almost a procrastinator. I'll always get things done the last minute, but I'll get it done. So like month 6, finally we got it together, and it was like, and I think that was great. So I think you also have to put together a plan for yourself that's sustainable. And also do it you could do it in a lot of different stages in life. I've met founders, I met people who do this in college, I met people who did this I met people who have like with kids, like, and who decided to go through this journey anyway. But find a time in your life where you really think that you have that 6 to 9 month cushion, that you can live, that you can be okay, and you can go try something new.
I think that's great actionable advice, because I think a lot of people try to glamorize it and say, oh, I took this huge risk and I had no backup plan. And, people have been talking about this for a while, and now they're coming back and saying like, wait, actually have a backup plan, have your savings, have your goals, give yourself a timeline, because otherwise you can't just drop everything. There's risk, but there's risk with floaties, which I love how you called it that, right? So I think that's really, really important. You wrote an article, which I'm not even kidding, I was obsessed with. It was about credit unions and craft beer have in common, right? So first I learned that we both worked at breweries, but I think you like beer a lot more than me.
I didn't know something we have in common. Which brewery did you work at?
I worked at a brewery in DC. It was really cool. So I want to talk about what credit unions are, because I don't think a lot of people know what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And credit unions are like really like the hidden gem of financial services. And I'm on a as of course with Debbie and in general, like I'm definitely on a mission to help promote more awareness of what credit unions are. So credit unions are essentially not-for-profit financial institutions. They think of them as a bank. They're not technically a bank, but they're like a bank for all intents and purposes. They will provide the same services, right? So they'll provide checking, savings accounts, loans, mortgages, lots of different things, sometimes investment opportunities and options. The biggest difference is they are not-for-profit. They're not-for-profit. And why is this so crucial and so important? Because they're not-for-profit and they're member-owned. So essentially, when you join a credit union, you're technically a part owner of that credit union. And there are certain rights that come with that. And because it's not-for-profit, you're able to actually get way better financial services and way more transparent, way more consumer-friendly than what you would get at a for-profit financial institution, right? Now, this industry has had its own challenges, and the reason why you have not heard of credit unions and this awesome thing is because credit unions typically have lower budgets. They don't spend as much on marketing and technology and all this other stuff that makes banking very convenient. So that's why, like, I'm not gonna be a complete hypocrite here and say that I don't bank with a bank. I do. I also have a bank, and I also have a credit union. And I think that industry is currently making a lot of great steps to make their financial services so much better and more lucrative, and the products at the end of the day are so much better. So especially when it comes to right now in my life, for larger financial products like my auto loans, I'll do that always with a credit union. My future mortgage, always gonna with the credit union. Any other loan I need, always gonna go to the credit union. And even some like large savings accounts, I'll do with the credit union because they have great rates and they're just, really awesome in that way. And so I think they're right now making some great steps, and we want to be part of that, of making credit unions cool again and bringing them back and making sure that young people know who they are and why they're beneficial. So yeah, if you don't already bank with a credit union and want to learn more, you can go to Debbie, to joindebbie.com, and we will match you with a credit union either in your area or credit union that you're a good fit for. And then you'll be able to, they'll also actually sponsor all of these free rewards for you to make better financial decisions, which is great. They're willing to do that. They're willing to you're actually willing to invest dollars in people's financial health, which awesome. Is, great.
Yeah. I was actually going to say that everyone should go check out Debbie's Instagram, because Debbie's definitely making credit unions cool again. You guys are doing a great job at that.
Thank you.
I love it. So what are some tips for people who are not in debt, but they want to make sure they never have debt?
Stay on top of it. I think that's really what it is. And by the way, the Debbie app is not just for people who are in debt. Now you also get rewarded for saving money. You get rewarded for making your payments on time, whether or not you're in debt. So you can still benefit a lot from this program. But I think stay on top of it. And also, think about where your dollars are going beyond that. So let's say you're not in debt anymore, or you've never been in debt. Like, where's your money going, right? There's so many other steps to reach financial security and financial prosperity past debt payoff. And so I think that's where you want to really allocate your dollars to things that matter. So even if you're not in debt, maybe instead of spending extra this month, put that in a savings account, put that in an investment account. Think about how to maybe put together a little, I don't know if one of your goals is to eventually buy a home or buy a car. Make a separate account to invest in that every single month or every week or whatever works for you. I think that I like this idea of assigning dollars to those things and also making that the first thing. Like, there's this concept in personal finance management. They say pay yourself first. And paying yourself first means when your paycheck comes, put the first dollars into your future. Invest in yourself first. So whether that is, like I said, a fund towards some big expense that you're going to have, right? Like some big asset you want to buy, or towards just investing or whatever, put that there. And then you can spend on other things, right? You can spend on the here and now, things that you like. Also make a budget for that. That's important. Make sure that you are, that's another toxic thing that I got into, because this happens a lot to people who struggled financially in their early days, and then had to and finally got better. And I had this time where I didn't spend any money. I was crazy. I would not buy myself anything. I would wear pairs of shoes, and at that point I was working in Wall Street. I remember I walked into my therapist's office and she was like, don't ever walk into my office with those shoes again, because that's crazy, and you make enough money, you're paying me a lot of money, go get some shoes. And I was like, oh, I need to get some shoes. And then I decided, instead of making it so restrictive, I actually made a budget for myself that I had to spend on whatever, the things that I just wanted, right? Clothes, going out to eat, whatever it was. And then it made me freer. Made me okay, I know this is the money I could spend. And then you actually are more in control of it than when you don't, you try to never spend, and then you lose control of it.
Yeah, I can so relate to that. I used to have my mom text me go spend money on yourself, go treat yourself, go buy something. But I was so, again, also, no one taught me about money. So when I finally like figured it out, I was so cautious with it and so scared to spend anything. I completely get you. So I want to get a little bit more personal. You're someone that, when I think about being unapologetically yourself and like integrating Judaism with just who you are, making it your own, I think of you. I seriously mean that. You really inspire me in that sense. Okay. So I want to hear a little bit from you, how you integrate Judaism, religion, however you want to put it, with self-expression and just staying true to yourself and making it your own.
Wow. First of all, thank you. I wish I never thought of myself having all this figured out. And honestly, that's another thing. Like, I want to admit I don't have it all figured out. And I think that's perfectly fine. I've come to terms with it. And I think I used to think that I had to figure it out. I was very, like, when I was younger, I thought I knew exactly. I was like on this path. I was very strict with myself, and I really liked. Also, I was at that point using religion in my life, and I don't think the best way, because I needed structure. So I was like, I'm gonna be religious. I'm gonna follow the rules. I was like I was a stickler for the rules. Like, I needed certain things to be done a certain way, and it took me like a long time to evolve. And honestly, it was a very humbling experience. The other thing that I have to say is that when I was younger and I was very strict on certain religious things, I used to like really judge. I was very judgmental. So that's like my character flaw. Okay, it's one of my biggest flaws. I am a judgmental person. I work on it all the time, and I'm trying to become less judgmental, and I have become less judgmental, a lot less. But I remember I would look at people who were like less religious or like lost touch. I was like, oh, like, how could they? They're not true. Like, you know, they're just whatever. They're taking the lazy way out. And lo and behold, a few years later, I was making the same shortcuts. Yeah. I was also like, I needed to find my own way. And it's been such a humbling experience. And I'm like, wow. Like, no, I'm not better than anyone. I'm not, like, I also sometimes take shortcuts. I also take the lazy way out sometimes. Like, it's not easy for me. And especially, like, you know, when you navigate life, different things come up. It's not always going to be the same. And so I think being okay with that is important. The one thing that I've always said that I still say is, at least for me, I want to be mindful. So if I'm making decisions, it's okay if in the moment, whatever, I'm taking certain shortcuts, I'm not always true to exactly what I want to be, but I want to be on the growth path where I want to be curious. I want to be interested. I want to learn. I want to understand. And for me, I do consider myself to be very spiritual, and religion is really important to me. Judaism is very important to me. And so I do think that, you know, if that's something that speaks to you and you care about it, take the time to learn more, to understand, to think about it, to explore. It doesn't really, like, the rules and everything else will fall into place for you. You'll figure that part out as you go, but that has to come with learning, right? I think the other thing is, like, the way we grew up, it was just rules. No learning, no thinking. No, you were very much on, like, automatic. And for a while that worked for me, and I kept going with that path, like, until I was like, hey, now that I started thinking about this stuff, like, oh, well, this makes sense, like, you know, and then I had to, like, find my own way to self-express. The other thing is, I think also, like, where you put I know this is very cliche, but who you surround yourself with is very important, because what you were saying about staying true to yourself, it's unfortunately not everyone it's possible for, and I don't even know if everyone can change their environments. It's very hard. It's a very, very hard thing to do. I've just had to, like, change environments, change friends multiple times, and because I needed to find a place where I was really comfortable, where I could be myself, where I could be true to myself. Part of it is also working on yourself and being unapologetically you, no matter what, you know, being that person, like, I don't care what people say, blah, blah, blah. And I say that all the time, but at the end of the day, we're all influenced by people around us. That's another humbling thing. No, of course you do care what people say, to an extent, right? We shouldn't care too much. There's a healthy balance, and I don't think that, I don't let anybody dictate my life or anyone's opinion do that. But I think that surrounding yourself with that right environment, so like the learning combined with being in an environment of people around you who are also growth-oriented and open-minded and are willing to hear other things, are willing to hear opinions other than their own, and don't live in a little echo chamber where they keep hearing the same things, those combinations for me have worked really, really well, I think, so.
I think it's also putting it together, like, it's a cliche, but I think cliches are cliche for a reason. Who you surround yourself with is really important, because, again, we all care what people think, but we have to choose who we care about, right? Like, if it's a stranger that's telling me about my life, then it doesn't really affect me. But if it's my mom or my sister, I want to hear that, because I trust them, and I choose to have these people in my life. So I knew you were the right person to talk to about this. Thank you for sharing. So to end off, I ask all my guests what a trailblazer means to them. So what does a trailblazer mean to you?
Wow, that's a very good question. I'm gonna tie it a little bit to like what I also think about leadership.
I like that.
Because I think, you know, you could be that person who goes somewhere where no one else goes.
Mm-hmm.
But I really think for you to do that successfully and to keep a happy lifestyle, you do that by bringing other people with you and doing it together. Like, I'm very much a teamwork kind of person. I've never been good at doing things alone. Like, I would never be able to start this company without my amazing co-founder and without my team, honestly. And I think that being the trailblazer means being like the engine for this, but then also surrounding yourself with people who like are all there together. And you could be like, I think for like in my company, I don't know if I'm the smartest or the most knowledgeable. I try to surround, like, I hope people on my team, like, definitely my co-founder is way smarter than me. Like, a lot of our employees are like, they know more than me. They're out there. They have all this knowledge that I don't have. So I just see myself as like that engine. Like, I'll be the oil. Like, I'll be the thing that like gets, you know, hopefully them excited, and like then we all do things together and change things together. I think today, like, today was a perfect example. Like, for the first time, my team closed a very big deal with SoFi, if you know. Like,
of course I know. Yeah, wow, congratulations.
And I was not involved, like, barely. Like, I knew about it, and then I was like such a like amazing, cool moment where I was like, whoa, like,
that's amazing.
Like, they, you know, it's doing things, like, it's happening. And I think that is very cool when you take people with you on a journey and you just help fuel the whole system and be that fuel and create change that way. Because you could go on a trail alone. I don't know, I've never been a lone hiker, never like that. So
it's not as fun.
I did solo trips, but solo trips are very different because I never was alone. I literally just would go places and like get people together and be like, oh yeah, let's get a group, let's go somewhere, let's meet random people. So some people can do it alone. I'm not saying it's not possible, and I've seen people do amazing things on their own, but at least in my mind, being a trailblazer is really creating like a group, rallying people around you as much as you can, being that fuel and learning from them and learning from the experience and doing it as a team.
Yeah. I love that perspective. I think also, like, if you, at least in my life, when some of the most amazing leaders that I see are the people that know who to bring along. And a lot of times, yes, they're smarter. I don't want to use the word smarter, but maybe more educated in certain places, and being able to choose the right people, to be able to trust them and like let them go and take care of the rest of the stuff. I think the best leaders have that ability. But thank you so much, Frida, for joining us today. It was such an amazing opportunity to talk to you.